Hey guys, Beast here once again. Today I'll be talking about Call to Action April 20th balance testing. So, as you guys probably know by now, yesterday Blizzard released these new patch notes that might be going live or might not, but I'll be talking about them today, what I think about them, and how I think they will play out. For starters, I'll actually skip the Terran ones because I did some math for the Terran changes. So we'll be going to the Protoss ones first. So the Tempest simply got a damage buff. So kinetic overload damage increased from 30 plus 14 against massive to 30 plus 25 against massive. So this includes damage buffs against carriers, against Tempests, Broodlords, and battle cruisers. Now, I think they mentioned this. The reason why they want to introduce the buff is because of Broodlords and carriers, because they felt that massing carriers in PvP was too strong. So they're introducing the buff hoping to kind of help with that. Personally, I haven't heard any Protoss player complain about late game and the inability of the Tempest to actually, do damage. So this was kind of a weird change for me. I'm pretty sure that Protoss players feel the same, and they're probably going to be like, "Oh, cool, damage buff, thank you." So not too much to add on that. That's one of those things that we have to see how it will play out in the actual games. But congrats to all Protoss players, I guess. Now the Void Ray change was also one of the changes that I don't think anyone asked for. But me as a Terran player, I welcomed it quite happily. So Void Ray Prismatic Alignment slows the Void Ray by 40% while active. Prismatic Alignment is the kind of the overcharge for the Void Ray when it deals extra damage against armored units. The way this will work is I can see it mostly for TVP as far as early all-ins go, because you don't really use Void Rays in the late game against Terran. You don't really use Void Rays in PvP unless you want to fight against Tempests, which again, I'm not sure how they actually play out with the Tempest movement speed and Void Ray movement speed while the 40% debuff is on. But against Terran, mostly in the early game, the Void Ray all-ins will be way easier to handle. The Protoss won't be able to use prismatic alignment and chase your Vikings anymore or your Cyclones. As you guys probably know, if the Protoss is Void Ray all-inning you and they use prismatic alignment, it's pretty hard to move your Viking away from it. And if you're too close, you're definitely going to lose the Viking because the Void Ray is pretty much the same speed as the Viking is and the Cyclones. But with this nerf, you will actually be able to move away, and it will be more of a committal from the Protoss player. So once you use your prismatic alignment, uh, you won't be able to chase units, but it will be most likely used for busting down the bunkers or missile turrets, and you kind of have to be careful how you use it. In ZVP, I can see this being used in late game from the Zerg. Once they engage with Corruptors, when the Protoss uses Prismatic Alignment, the Zerg can just move away without the Protoss being able to chase the Corruptors. And that's pretty much it. Overall, as a Terran player, I like this change, obviously. Uh, it will make the holding off of early Void Ray all-ins a lot easier. So I'm happy about that. Now, the last Protoss change is the Zealot change, which is pretty straightforward. Charge upgrade lowered from 200 200 to 100 100. The Blizzard has mentioned that the Zealots were underused in all matchups and they wanted to find ways to buff them. Now, I don't think this is the way to go about it. I think with the addition of new units, Zealots kind of got pushed back due to them being melee units. Um, for those who might not know, the Zealots were actually buffed twice since Heart of the Swarm. The Zealot movement speed was buffed, and the Zealot charged on impact is now doing damage, which did not happen in Heart of the Swarm. And with the introduction of Adepts, I think they effectively pushed the Zealots completely out of the Protoss unit compositions. And I guess this is the attempt to, include faster Zealot transitions early game of a Twilight, kind of like what you're doing off of, Twilight into Blink or Twilight into Resonant Enclaves. I personally don't think this will have changed much. I don't think Protoss builds will pop up where you go for Zealot charge timing, simply because Adepts are just better at everything that the Zealot can do. Adept is a ranged unit. Adept can shade, it can run away, it can harass better. It deals more damage against light units, and it does the same job that the Zealot does, which is tanking in the mid game. So this is one of those things where I'm sure the Protoss players will be happy, but will it change the Adept role in the current metagame? Probably not. Now moving on to the Zerg, there's actually only one Zerg change that was in this balance patch, which is not so much of a balance, more of just a visual change. So undetected burrow move visual effects should be more visible. And I think they specifically mentioned this for Infestor. And they said that they want to make it more visible, kind of like Widow Mines are. Now, because they're not mentioning specifically Infestor here, I'm guessing that it will work for all the units, like Burrowed Roaches or Burrowed Infestors. And if this is true and if it works like the Widow Mines, you will actually be able to spot Burrowed Roaches and Burrowed Infestors way easier, which again is one of the changes that I'm not sure if it was needed, but I think both Protoss and Terran players will welcome this change because, you know, any buff is a good buff as long as it's benefiting your race. Now, moving on to the Terran changes, which I saved for last once again. So to go quickly through them, the Thor was changed. High impact payload mode is completely removed, which is the single target attack against armored units. Javelin missile launchers damage increased from 6 plus 6 versus light to straight up 12 damage. And the Raven auto turret damage reduced from 24 to 18, while the auto turret duration was increased from 7.14 seconds to 10 seconds. Now, I actually did some math as far as this goes because I was curious if this is an actual nerf or a buff. So I'm going to show you guys the math behind it. So stay with me. It might be a little bit confusing on the start, but I promise you it's very easy. So the old, I'll do the Raven change first, the auto turn change. So the old one was the first one that we'll go through. So it was 0.57 attack speed, which means that it attacked 1.75 times per second. And the auto turret lasted 7.14 seconds. It dealt 24 damage, which equal to 300 damage total. And it gave it a DPS of the one auto turret 42.10. Now, the 300 damage total is not exactly accurate because I've tested this in a unit map tester and the auto turret never did exactly the same amount of damage. It depended where the unit was when it was shooting. So on paper, the damage is 300, but it's more around 250 to 280 average damage. Like I said, depending where you put the turret and when you put it. But DPS of it is 42.10 second, 40.10 damage, which is what matters. Now, the new auto turret that's getting updated is the same attack speed. So it's 0.57, which means 1.75 attacks per second. It's going to be lasting 10 seconds. It will deal 18 damage, which equals for 350 damage total. So over time, the new auto turret will do more damage, but the DPS will be lowered to 31.5 because it lasts longer. Now, these are the raw numbers, and again, it won't deal full 350 damage. It will most likely deal between 280 to 300 damage per auto turret. Now, what do these numbers actually mean in the games themselves? Well, it means that the auto turrets will not be as effective early on to kill drones. And I say drones because the Ravens were mostly used in TVZ in a recent meta, where you open with some Hellions, open with Ravens, and then you send one Raven and you harass the drone line because it took 2 shots to kill a drone. With this change, it will take 3 shots to kill one drone. But even though at first it might seem like a nerf, it will last 3 seconds longer. So the Zerg will not be able to simply pull out the drones and come back and continue mining because the auto turret will last 3 seconds longer. So the Zerg might actually have to send units to kill the auto turret instead of just waiting for it to expire. Now, this is one of those things that I say that it's something that we should kind of let it play out and see how it actually is in the game because it's both nerf and buff at the same time, depending on situation you use the auto turrets in. As far as mid and late game, I think this is a buff because when you do a push against Protoss or in TVT, the turret almost never dies. It always expires because no one wants to attack the turret. They always try to focus fire your Marines, your siege tanks. So I think in mid and late game, this is actually a buff because the turret will last longer. It will give you more solid ground for you to move your army. So as far as that goes, in my opinion, it's definitely a buff into mid and late game while making it less volatile in the early game. So obviously this is a change. I won't say it a nerf. I won't call it a nerf or a buff in the early game against Zerg. But I welcome this change in TVT early on so much because if you guys played StarCraft in the past couple of months, you know how annoying it is when a Raven arrives in your base in TVT and kills so many of your SCVs because early game in TVT you can't really defend other turrets too effectively and it kind of becomes very volatile matchup where if you're not in a position at quite right time, you're going to lose a lot of SCVs and potentially lose the game. So thumbs up from me for this change. Overall, I think this is correct path for the Raven in the future, and it will improve the all other matchups in the mid to late game. So I really like this change. Now, we're going to go into Thor math right here. So as I read earlier, Thors were changed as well. So the old one, Javelin missile launchers were 6+6 versus light damage plus, times 4 attacks, which equaled to 24 damage against armored units plus 24 versus light splash damage. So if you attack the Mutalisk, you would deal 48 damage splash. And high impact payload was 35 damage against everything plus 15 damage versus armored units. It only dealt it was only one attack, and that equal to 50 damage versus armored single target damage. Now the new Thor is 12 damage per shot. Again, you have to remember Thor shoots 4 times, but it's versus everything. So there's no more light or armored. It's 12 damage against everything times 4 attacks, so it's 48 splash damage. Now, at first, I saw that a lot of people thought this was a nerf. This is actually, in my opinion, a huge buff. Now, high impact payload mode is removed completely, so there's no more single target fire damage. But if you compare it to how it was before, it was 50 damage versus armored, whether now it's 48 splash damage versus everything. So if you're fighting against Liberators or Broodlords, if the opponent is stacking their units, the splash is actually pretty insane. If you're playing mech in TVT like I do, if the opponent is going for Viking Liberator composition, if they clump up Vikings for 1 second, with 3-4 Thors, you can actually one-shot like 20 Vikings plus. So this is actually, in my opinion, a huge buff in TVT mech for the mech player. And it won't really affect how Thors against Mutalisk work because it still does the exact same damage as it did before, except now it just deals more damage against everything else. And this will help the Terran quite a lot against Corruptors because if you know, on the patch that we're playing on now, it will only deal 24 damage versus Corruptor's Splash. With this change, it will deal literally double the damage, so if the Zerg players clump up Corruptors, it will simply demolish them. Now, another thing this is super useful against is Vipers. As you guys know, if you reach into the late game, the Zerg is trying to stack Corruptors and pull your units. Well, if they do that and Thor shoot, you might end up one-shotting all of their Vipers. So again, I don't think this change is, imbalanced. I think it's very good, and it might actually make Thor a unit that you want to make, whether you play bio or mech, and it might actually be used against all three races compared to what it was before, where you only used it against Liberators or against Mutas in TVZ. I'm not actually sure how this will be played out in TVP, um, because, like I said, with the Void Ray change and the Tempest change, we kind of have to just play and see, because I don't see many situations where you would mass Thors against Protoss, whether it's against Tempests or Carriers, because I think there's always better options against that. But it actually might be good against Phoenix early on. If the Protoss is trying to harass you with Phoenix, 48 straight up splash damage against Phoenix if they clump them up can result in quite a disaster for a Protoss player. But like I said, with the recent Adept nerf on health, I don't think that the meta game will continue to be just Mass Adapt Phoenix. So I'm not really sure how much it will affect TVP. But this overall, I think, is a huge, huge buff for mech Terrans in general. Buff against Corruptors, against Vipers, against Vikings, and Liberators in TVT. So for me, like I said, as a mech player, it's a huge thumbs up. Both of these Terran changes. And once again, these are all the changes that will be on the balanced test map that you guys can play on Battle.net. I want to thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I will be doing more of these videos in the future whenever Blizzard decides to release new patch notes. Let me know in the comments, what did you think about all of these proposed changes by Blizzard? And like always, if you did like the video, make sure you like and subscribe for new videos in the future. And once again, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.